Alright, in this tutorial I'm going to show you a shortcut way of getting your provisional cast on started. I discovered this a while back when I was doing a provisional cast on for a waistband, and it just was going to take me too long. So I wanted a shortcut. Sometimes I get impatient. I came up with this method to actually crochet the chain stitches directly onto the knitting needle. It saves you a step. My least favorite part of a provisional cast on is picking up each of those chain stitches and putting them on the knitting needles. So this was my solution. Just because I figured it out on my own does not mean that no one else has ever figured it out before me. Us yarny folks are a very creative lot, so it's entirely possible someone else came up with this first. I am not going to lay claim to this as entirely my invention, but I do think it's nifty, so I am going to share it with you. To start off with your provisional cast on, you start off the same way as with the traditional one. You want to use a yarn that is similar to the yarn you're going to be working your piece out of. Preferably in a different color so that it's easy to remove, it's easier to see it when you have to remove it later, and preferably not fuzzy or nubby because that will make removing your provisional cast on later very difficult. What you want to do from here is just make a couple chain stitches just to get yourself going. Now here is where things start to differ. Rather than continuing to make a bunch of chains and then slipping my needle into them later, I'm going to make these chains around my knitting needle. So, to do that, place your knitting needle in front of your yarn. So your yarn wraps around behind your knitting needle. Wrap the yarn around the knitting needle and make a chain. Then, wrap the yarn around the knitting needle, make your next chain. Wrap the yarn around the back of the knitting needle, make a chain. Wrap the yarn around the back of the knitting needle, make a chain. Remember not to pull this too tight. Wrap the yarn around the back of the knitting needle, make a chain. Around the back of the knitting needle, make a chain. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's make 10. 7, 8, 9, around the back of the knitting needle, make a chain. 10. Once you've done all of your cast on, you needed to cast on 10, there are 10, then go ahead and just chain a couple extra just to be safe, and tie a very loose knot because you are going to need to remove this later, but you don't want it to come out until you're ready. Now you're going to continue working just like you would with a provisional cast on made in the traditional way. All you're going to do is start your knitting. Okay, I'm going to show you the first couple rows just so that you're sure how to really get going on this. All I do is knit into each of these stitches just as if I had cast them on in any other manner. Don't worry that that very first stitch, that very beginning of that yarn is not tied down. We will deal with that in a moment. So we knit all of these, all 10 of our stitches. Now we turn our work and we're working in stocking knit, so this is going to be a purl row. When I work in rows, I always slip my first stitch. So slip one and then purl the rest. Okay, when we get to this row, when we get to the end of this row, I will show you how I deal with that free end at the beginning of my yarn. You see how loose this stitch is because this end is free. What I do here There are several ways of dealing with this. You can ignore it. I find if you don't do anything with it, like if you ignore it and then just weave it in later, what happens is you aren't actually able to pick up the very first stitch. This right here, this is supposed to be your first stitch, this loop. In order to make that work, you need to do something with the end of this yarn. So what I do is I tie this yarn, and tie my end around my working yarn. What that does is it gives me stability so that my work won't come undone, and it gets that first loop turned back into a loop. Okay? I've seen people use slip stitches, slip knots of various sorts at the beginning before they get going. I've never been able to make it work for me. This is what works for me, so this is what I'm sharing with you. By all means, certainly welcome to figure out something else. That's how I came up with this cast on in the first place. So now that we've got that all tied down and ready to go, you're just going to keep on working in stocking knit stitch. So slip one knitwise and keep on knitting. And you're just going to continue your object, your piece, in whatever manner your pattern tells you to from here on out. There is a video underneath here to show you how to move your provisional cast on stitches onto a needle. I hope you find all of this information helpful, and you can always find other tutorials and various blog posts over at jessieathome.com.